April 1st, 2006. Just after 1:30 in the morning, security cameras captured a 27-year-old medical student walking into a crowded bar in Columbus, Ohio. He was laughing with friends. Nothing seemed unusual. Nothing suggested that this would become the last confirmed sighting of him. His name was Brian Shaffer. What happened over the next few hours would become one of the most baffling missing person cases in modern America. Because according to the available surveillance footage, Brian appeared to enter the bar, but he was never clearly seen leaving. Nearly 2 decades later, his disappearance remains unsolved, and investigators still cannot say with certainty what happened after that night. Before he became the subject of documentaries, podcasts, and endless online discussion, Brian Shaffer was simply a young man with ambitious plans. He was born on February 25, 1979, and grew up in Pickerington, Ohio. Friends described him as intelligent, outgoing, and quick to make people laugh. He had chosen one of the most demanding career paths imaginable: medicine. By 2006, Brian was a second-year student at The Ohio State University College of Medicine. The workload was intense. Long hours, constant studying. Little free time, but those close to him said he handled the pressure well. He looked forward to becoming a doctor. He had his entire future ahead of him. Just weeks before his disappearance, Brian's life had been shaken by tragedy. His mother, Renee, had died after battling cancer. The loss deeply affected the entire family. Friends later recalled that Brian appeared heartbroken. Even so, he tried to keep moving forward. Classes continued. Life continued. And in early April, he was preparing for a short vacation with his girlfriend in Miami. It was meant to be a chance to relax after a difficult few months. That trip would never happen. Friday, March 31st, 2006. Brian had finished another demanding week of medical school. Like many students, he decided to spend the evening with friends. The plan was simple: meet up, visit a few bars, enjoy the start of the weekend. Nothing out of the ordinary. Earlier in the evening, Brian met his father. The two had dinner together. They talked about the upcoming vacation. There was no argument, no indication that anything was wrong. After dinner, they went their separate ways. It would be the last time Brian's father ever saw his son. Later that night, Brian met his friend William Clint Florence. The two were joined by Clint's friend, Meredith Reed. Together, they visited several bars in downtown Columbus. Witnesses described Brian as being in good spirits. He was laughing, talking, socializing. No one reported unusual behavior. No one believed he was in danger. As midnight approached, the group made their way to the Ugly Tuna Saloona, a popular bar located inside the South Campus Gateway complex. The venue sat on an upper level of the building, accessible by an escalator. Security cameras monitored the entrance area. Thousands of people passed through every weekend. On that Friday night, a few could have imagined those cameras would become the center of an international mystery. At approximately 1:15 a.m., surveillance cameras recorded Brian, Clint, and Meredith approaching the escalator leading to the bar. The footage is clear. Brian can be seen entering with his friends. Inside, the bar was busy. Music filled the room. Students talked over drinks. People came and went throughout the night. Brian spent time speaking with friends. At one point, he was seen talking to 2 women he'd met inside the bar. Both women would later tell investigators that the conversation seemed completely normal. Brian appeared relaxed, friendly, and in no apparent distress. Around closing time, Clint and Meredith left the bar. They expected Brian to follow. Instead, he wasn't there. At first, they assumed he had gone to the restroom, or perhaps he was finishing a conversation. They waited outside. Minutes passed. Still, no Brian. They tried calling his phone. No answer. Eventually, they returned to his apartment, believing he might already be there. He wasn't. The next morning, Brian failed to board his flight to Miami with his girlfriend. That was completely out of character. Friends became concerned. His father became concerned. Calls went unanswered. No one could reach him. On April 3rd, Brian Shaffer was officially reported missing. Police immediately began searching for answers. The investigation quickly focused on one critical piece of evidence: the surveillance footage from the Ugly Tuna Saloona. Detectives believed if they could determine exactly how Brian left the bar, they might understand what happened next. But when investigators reviewed the recordings, they found something that transformed an ordinary missing person investigation into one of the greatest mysteries in modern true crime. The cameras clearly showed Brian walking in, but finding footage of him leaving would prove far more difficult than anyone expected. As detectives began reviewing the surveillance footage, they expected the case to be straightforward. Identify the time Brian left the bar, determine which direction he walked, then begin retracing his movements. It seemed simple, until they watched the recordings, again and again and again. The security cameras clearly captured Brian entering the Ugly Tuna Saloona shortly after 1:15 in the morning. They also recorded hundreds of other patrons leaving throughout the night, groups of friends, couples, employees, security staff. Most people could be followed entering and later exiting, but Brian could not. Investigators never found clear footage showing him leaving through the main entrance. That single fact would define the entire investigation. News of the missing medical student quickly spread throughout Columbus. Almost immediately, people began asking the same question. If Brian never left the bar, where did he go? Police urged caution. They explained that the surveillance system did not capture every possible angle. There were areas the cameras couldn't see: blind spots, service corridors, emergency exits, construction areas connected to the building. The footage was extensive, but it wasn't perfect. The statement was important, because despite what many headlines later suggested, investigators never claimed it was impossible for Brian to have left the building, only that they could not identify him doing so on the available recordings. Detectives searched the Ugly Tuna Saloona from top to bottom. Every room, every storage area, every restroom. Nothing suggested Brian had remained inside. The building itself was also examined. Construction workers, employees, security personnel, anyone connected to the complex was interviewed. No one reported seeing Brian after closing time. Police also considered whether Brian might have left through a service exit. At the time, parts of the South Campus Gateway complex were still undergoing construction. Some exits were primarily used by employees, delivery workers, or contractors. Could Brian have wandered into one of those areas? Could he have exited somewhere beyond the cameras? Investigators explored that possibility, but no evidence ever confirmed it. As the days passed, the search expanded far beyond the bar. Officers searched nearby streets, parking garages, wooded areas, construction sites, vacant buildings. Volunteers joined organized searches. Friends distributed missing person flyers throughout Columbus. The Ohio State community rallied behind Brian's family. Everyone hoped that someone, somewhere, had seen him after he left the bar, but no confirmed sighting ever emerged. Detectives also examined Brian's personal life. His bank accounts showed no activity. His credit cards were never used. His passport remained untouched. His mobile phone, which had briefly continued to ring after he disappeared, eventually stopped connecting altogether. There was no evidence he had withdrawn money, no indication he had packed belongings. No sign of a planned disappearance. To investigators, nothing suggested Brian intended to walk away from his life. Family members consistently rejected the idea that Brian had voluntarily disappeared. He was close to his family. He was committed to medical school. He had an upcoming holiday planned with his girlfriend. And despite grieving the recent loss of his mother, those closest to him said he continued making plans for the future. His disappearance simply didn't fit. Then, investigators discovered something that generated even more questions. Brian's mobile phone had continued to receive calls after he vanished. For weeks, friends and family repeatedly dialed his number. Usually, the calls went directly to voicemail. But on one occasion, months after Brian disappeared, the phone appeared to ring, just once. Then, it stopped. The event was never fully explained. Investigators cautioned that technical issues within mobile phone networks can occasionally produce unexpected behavior. Still, for Brian's family, that single ringing call offered a brief moment of hope that quickly faded. With no body, no confirmed sightings, and no definitive evidence showing how Brian left the area, investigators were forced to consider multiple possibilities: an accidental death, a voluntary disappearance, foul play, or something else entirely. Each theory had supporters, each had weaknesses, and none could fully explain all the known facts. The mystery had only grown deeper, and the answers, if they existed, were still somewhere beyond the view of a single security camera. As the investigation continued, one thing became increasingly clear. Every theory seemed plausible, until it encountered a piece of evidence that didn't fit. Police considered the possibility that Brian had left voluntarily. He was grieving the loss of his mother. Medical school was demanding. Some wondered whether the pressure had simply become too much. But investigators found very little to support that idea. Brian left behind his bank accounts, his car, his passport, his apartment, his clothing, his future career, and the holiday he had been looking forward to. There was no evidence he had prepared for a new life. To those who knew him, walking away without contacting anyone seemed completely out of character. Another theory suggested that Brian had left the bar unnoticed and later become the victim of a random crime. The area surrounding the South Campus Gateway remained busy well into the early morning. Hundreds of people were still moving through the streets. If Brian had encountered the wrong person, it might explain why no further trace of him was ever found. But investigators never uncovered evidence linking him to a robbery, an assault, or any known suspect. No witnesses came forward claiming to have seen such an incident. No forensic evidence supported the theory. Others believed Brian may have suffered an accident after leaving the building. Search teams examined nearby construction areas, car parks, woodland, drainage systems, and locations that might conceal a body. Over the years, additional searches were conducted whenever new information emerged. Despite these efforts, nothing connected to Brian was ever discovered. No clothing, no personal belongings, no remains. It was as though he had simply vanished. As the years passed, the case continued to attract widespread attention. Television documentaries, podcasts, online forums, and amateur investigators all attempted to solve the mystery. Some theories relied on verified evidence. Others were based almost entirely on speculation. Investigators repeatedly reminded the public that many popular internet claims were unsupported by evidence. In a case with so few confirmed facts, it became easy for rumors to spread. Separating fact from speculation grew more difficult with each passing year. Brian's father, Randy Shaffer, never stopped searching for answers. He gave interviews, worked with investigators, appealed to the public. Like every parent of a missing person, he wanted only one thing: to know what happened to his son. Tragically, Randy died in 2008, without ever learning the answer. For Brian's family, that was another heartbreaking chapter in an already devastating story. Today, Brian Shaffer remains officially listed as a missing person. No confirmed sightings have been verified since the night of March 31, 2006. No one has been charged in connection with his disappearance. And despite years of investigation, law enforcement has never announced a definitive conclusion. The surveillance footage from the Ugly Tuna Saloona remains one of the most discussed pieces of evidence. Not because it proves what happened, but because it leaves one crucial question unanswered. What happened after Brian entered that bar? Did he leave through an exit that cameras failed to capture? Did he meet someone after leaving? Was he the victim of an accident? Or a crime? Or is the truth something investigators have never considered? No one knows. Nearly 2 decades have passed. Friends have grown older. Students who once shared classrooms with Brian now have families of their own. The bar itself has closed. The building has changed. The city has continued moving forward, yet the mystery remains frozen in time. A single night, a crowded bar, a missing medical student, and a question that still has no answer. Some mysteries are solved through one overlooked witness, one forgotten photograph, or one new piece of forensic evidence. Until that day comes, Brian Shaffer's disappearance will remain one of America's most enduring unsolved mysteries. And somewhere, the truth about what happened after that April night is still waiting to be discovered.